Thousands of authors have made the jump to self-publishing. Now you can take control of your own destiny and get your book published today with help from self-publishing experts Adam Stemple and Chris Wallace on the Written Well podcast.
Greetings, YouTube viewers. Thanks and welcome to the Written Well podcast, episode 3. We have a very special episode this time. My usual co-host Adam Stemple has managed to get his sister, Heidi E.Y. Stemple, who is an accomplished children's book author, and their mother, Jane Yolen, who is a wildly accomplished author, who's won a list of awards I was going to read off, and it just was too long. It is absurd. Check out her website. You'll see what I mean. The list of medals and library awards and various book awards is incredible. Jane has published about 400 books. So between the three of them, they're at around 500 books. It was a real pleasure to have everybody on. We had some minor technical difficulties at the very beginning. So we're going to start here. We just lost a few minutes. We're going to start here in medias res, as they say in the storytelling world, with Jane talking about students and critique.
I always like to tell my students that there's no editor that I know who wants to make your book worse. I mean,
the funny,
sometimes it feels that way. Sometimes it feels that way in the beginning.
Yes.
but here's the tricky part of it is we have all had, and we will never name any names, but we have all had bad editors, a bad copy editor. So it shouldn't be an adversarial relationship, but you'll also have to recognize when someone doesn't understand the work, when someone is not equal to the task. I mean, we've all been very lucky, but there have been those times where you're like, no, this is not working.
Because I say it's not adversarial, it's advisable. You need to advise them about what you're hoping or that's the way it's spelled in this particular country, or this is the name I want. I don't want to change it just because you don't like the name of the main character. I mean, there
has to be give and take as well.
Exactly.
There's a magazine I won't submit to ever again because it was such a nightmare working with them editorially, and they would take they were all suggestions and no listening to counter suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
It was an absolute nightmare, and it took 18 months on a short story to get it edited, and it was just ridiculous.
Well, Heidi and I have a publisher that we're never going to work for again, who rewrote our stuff.
Oh, nice.
And then didn't let us see it until it was published.
Oh yeah, that's not good.
No, we saw it in proofs, and we were able to have some re-input in it. But I've just had I want to counterbalance this bad editorial stories with a really great one. I have a book that's coming out in 2025, I think. It's actually about my mom as a child, and I was deep in the editorial process with my editor, who is absolutely brilliant, and I know she's absolutely brilliant. I sent her an exclusive submission of the book because I wanted her to be the editor of this book. I thought she was the right choice, and she purchased it. And we were deep in the editorial of this book, and it's a picture book. It's 32 pages, and
probably 100 words.
Yeah, no, it's definitely more than that, but it's not. It's maybe 500 words. And I got to a point where I was struggling against her editorial suggestions, and I felt that everything that I had submitted to her, she no longer liked. She was trying to change it so much. And I finally sat down and wrote an email to her, and I said, I'm struggling on this. I've never struggled with the revision before. I feel like you're sorry that you bought this book from me. And she called me right away and she said, you know what? This is a book you love about someone you love. It's supposed to be hard. And that gave me permission to realize it was okay to struggle on this revision, even though, you and I, Adam, grew up understanding revision, being okay with revision. We can tell you stories about that, which are hilarious.
That's an excellent. Let's talk about our Skinner-esque training in writing.
This
Adam,
has
Growing
been
up with Jane Yolen as your parent.
You know, right? But let me finish. Let me finish it. I'm almost at the end of this story, it just gave me permission to really talk with her about the emotional part of the revision process, which really helped me get over that hump of everything I've done is wrong and you don't like it anymore. And it was really important to have that wonderful conversation with someone who's doing your editorial, who you already knew was the perfect editor for the book, and releasing the sort of knot of anxiety about the revision process during it to make it better. And in the end, she was absolutely right. I just couldn't get over that yet until I talked to her. But asking honestly for the give and take to be as clear and open as possible for a revision.
But
now,
I think,
go on to the
hold on.
Thank
I think that one of the things we have to remember in the revision process, especially if it's an editor who likes to write all over your thing, but does not give you explanations. I think that it's important.
The explanations are so important. I have an editor over at Crohn's Girls Press who did the World War I story, who is just fantastic, because any changes she wanted, she put in a full explanation of why she wanted this paragraph taken out or why, and she was right 100% of the time. And you know, honestly, I had no arguments with her, and it was largely because she explained so well why she was taking this out for flow or for this and that. And it was just the editors who explain things
Yes.
are the best. And you know, and when I put in a stet or a counter suggestion or something, I explained why this is this way. And then if they come back with, well, it's not showing up as that, then I know, okay, I'll change it. But as long as there's some understanding there.
But again,
You can't get away from
not
this for too long,
adversarial.
Mom. We're going to talk about growing up.
So it's been a week for me of editing. I've been editing this entire week other people's short stories, and it's an educational experience for me, because I get a short story from Adam that is ready to go. This thing it's very good, it's very interesting, and it needs almost nothing. And then I've got a couple things from people who've never published anything before, and they had really good ideas and they did their best. And I sent them some revision suggestions already, and I have those back. And now I'm going through, and they are eager for. These are people I met at writing conferences who wanted to do this thing. They love this thing, and they're eager for me to tell them, because to them I'm a pro, right? In this conversation I'm an amateur. To them I'm a pro, and so it's easy for me to work. Much easier for me to work with them, and to send them as much instruction as possible. You know, hey, try not to do this thing. We'd like if you did this different. What if you told me more about this? That kind of, it's more comments than it is editing in some of these documents, these guys. And then in the middle, I have some professional authors whose stuff isn't like Adam's. It's not ready to go. They're people who used to working with editors. And so so then I had to like put my editing hat on. You know, I have an editing certificate. I learned about it. And I had to like very gently approach these professional authors who have written a lot of things and have made a lot more money writing than I have. Very gently approach them with, you know, this is great. Can you do more greatness in a different way that isn't this kind of great? You know, and not tell them
this kind of great is kind of sucking. So I need it great. Mom, you got to tell the Anne McCaffrey story now. When you bought a story from Anne McCaffrey. I can tell.
Yes, this was she had written a short story for me, and when I had my own imprint with Harcourt to do fantasy and science fiction books, I wrote to her and I said, remember that short story you did? I think there's a novel there. And so she went and she started it, and she sent me the first chapter, and my heart sank. Because as wonderful a writer as she was, she'd only done one or two teenage books before. and I'm thinking, what am I going to say to Anne McCaffrey? You got to do this again. Oh my God, how do I say it? She's been a New York Times bestseller for almost every adult book that she put out. I have great respect for her, and I went, dear Anne, I think that you have some problems in this. And she wrote back and she said, great, what do you want me to do? What do you think it needs? Because she was a total professional. I had people who I had tried who were newbies who would whine when you would ask for a few little things. But Anne McCaffrey said, fine. And she ended up rewriting that first chapter something like 7 times, and then sped through the rest of the book because she knew where she was going. She had gotten it all, everything that needed doing. She got it done in the first chapter, so she was on the path. But I never forgot how she didn't hesitate for a minute. She said, what do you want? How do I do this?
What was the name of the book?
I can't remember because I'm 83.
A long time ago.
Right.
I think
it was an Arthurian.
The more you write, the more you're able to deal with your words and your writing less like they're a precious gift and more like they're a sculpture you will continue molding with the help of others who can see different sides of it. You're just looking at it straight on, and they're looking at the side and the back, and they go, hey, over here, there's a big glitch here, and you're like, oh, I did not see that. Let me fix that. Whereas, when you've just written 1 or 2 things, everything's still very precious.
The people who are successful at anything are the people who are set their ego aside and can continue to learn about it. I learned it in my martial arts career, and then I learned about it in poker. And those things are so valuable to when people hear that I'm a professional poker coach and then I'm a world champion poker player, and then they start to tell me about how to play poker. I realize that this person has no chance, that they are never going to be successful. And that's the vast majority, by the way. Like, that's 98%. And then there's the 2%. I'm married to one of them, by the way, who my wife Jordan, knew I was a poker coach, and so bought me dinner and asked and peppered me with questions. And it's like a tiny fraction of people will go, oh, great, teach me all the things.
You're an expert. Tell me about it.
That is the attitude to have. And it's the attitude I took with every expert poker player that I met, which is why I went to Adam and said, you're good at poker. What's this thing all about? And Adam brought me some books, and there it was. And then, 23 years later.
And then he got better than me and won a bracelet. And I'm still kind of bitter about the whole thing.
I had more time. Than you.
That's not important.
I had more free time than you did.
That's also true.
I want to point out something. Adam and Heidi and I are all in different writing groups where we go on a weekly basis or a monthly basis to our groups, and they critique what we have written. And we don't whine. We think about what they said. First of all, they're friends and we trust them. And in some cases, they are better writers than we are. And I think that that's the sort of thing that sets you up for success for listening to critiques. But I get people who send me manuscripts all the time. And if they don't like the critique, then I'm a bad person.
Yes,
you didn't understand my book.
Don't send my mother your manuscripts. Can we just have a caption? Don't send my mother your manuscripts. You're going to get a note back from me saying she's not going to read your manuscript. Please don't say that there.
Just ignore the package that's coming from me.
Just ignore that. That was Chris is like, I wrote that address on there by mistake. I don't know what happened there.
Can I say something about taking on critique? Because we are all talking about how it's important and how it's easy and how all pros do it. And that's not necessarily across the board. And I have sort of a little rule with myself that what I say is my words that I say to people who are critiquing me when they hesitate. I said, I'm taking all notes. I'm taking all notes. Sometimes I'm thinking that's the dumbest note I've ever heard, but I have to keep an open mind and think I'm taking all notes, and I write them down. And my rule for myself is 2 days. I can sulk and I can say my thing is perfect and everybody else is wrong, whether that's an editor or a friend or a brother or a mother. And then after the 2 days, I have to get into it and really start looking at them as expert notes. But just because there's a bunch of people talking to you on a podcast saying, oh, this is really easy, you listen to notes and don't treat your words as precious, don't take that as it's a super easy thing to do. And everybody needs to just change the way that they think and just think about it that way. It doesn't always for every person come in. And generally I am of the, oh, absolutely, I am taking all notes and this is good. But sometimes I don't necessarily agree with it when the notes come in. And I give myself that 2-day grace period to allow myself to say, these people are idiots and I am perfect. And then after the 2 days, I have to admit that I have to take their notes. So if that's the way you take in notes, that's okay too. You don't have to, you're not born as an expert. Some of us, JY, maybe, but generally it does take some time to learn how to take a critique, and that's okay.
It's incredibly hard. It is incredibly hard. I have a great writers group, and really I'm in the very bottom of accomplished in this writers group. It's absolutely ridiculous. Just, locusts.
I know how that feels at the moment.
National Book Awards and Newbery's.
Newbery Award winner. Yeah.
And I haven't gotten any of them. It's very, but I brought my oldest child is just got accepted to an MFA program for creative writing, and they want to be a writer. And I intentionally brought them to one of my writers groups to see the process. And I brought them on a day where I knew my particular story was going to get savaged, because it was a much older story that had been kind of rebought. And I told the person, I need to update the story before it goes out. And they're like, okay. And so I brought it into the group, and it was 10 years out of date. It needed a lot of work, and so I just watched my kids' eyes go wide as my friends are just savaging this piece. And, it even got a little chippy at one point where I'm telling them, I got it, move on. Don't keep pounding this one point. And, and it was just important to see that you can, it's hard, but you can sit there and take it and thank someone for their critique at the end of it and listen to it. I always say, if you find yourself, after you rewrite to someone, to your critiques group's suggestions, if you can tell that the stories are consistently better, well, then you're in a good critique group. Then it's doing your job. If you find that their critiques are not useful and you write and then you think, oh, this story's worse, well, then, maybe you need a different critique group. Maybe those critiques aren't for you. And different critiquers have different pros and cons, and I refuse to be in one where people are mean. I think that's useless. So you can't get critique when people are deliberately mean. They can be incisive, they can be critical, but if they're just mean,
we have a rule in our group that before you tear something apart, say something good about it. If it is so hopeless, it won't be read in the group, because I'm as Adam is, in an all well-published group of writers. So we make it our business to say, I really like this one, or gosh, that's an idea, that's a wizard idea.
We have the same rule. And you're in it for a rough ride. There's two key statements where you're in a rough ride. And one of them is, I really like the font you chose for this piece. And also, I love you as a person, right?
We always joke in the family.
A close friend.
We always joke in the family that if it starts with, it had some lovely moments. That's
but
one
most
that
of
you
it is
put in the
shit.
bottom of the drawer.
You
All right.
you all sort of speak to that important piece of knowing that people are different than you, and that everybody handles this stuff differently and critiques differently. I know that Adam handles criticism probably as well as most authors, but not as well as I do, because I don't care at all. Tear my story up. I'll take whatever is useful out of that and go on with my day. And some of it comes from just my absurd level of overconfidence in life in general. And that no matter what bad things you say, I think, oh, great, I'm so smart. I'll take the useful stuff out of this. I'll leave the junk. There's going to be a ton of it because most people aren't as smart as me. And then I'll go on and I'll incorporate this into the rest of my story and make it better. But I had to learn that.
It's definitely a plus in a writing career.
Well,
it's definitely
right on then. Me and
I have
Hemingway
had to tell Chris at one point, and I am like the second least sensitive person in this group, possibly. And I told Chris, yeah, no, I can't, you can't tell me that this way. I know what you mean, but you just can't do it. It hits me too hard. You know, so tell me this instead. I mean, I've given him specific instructions of how to tell me shit is wrong, you know?
Yeah. And so I post my stuff in Critique Circle, which is an online thing that anyone can go critique your stuff. And I get a bunch of valuable things out of that. It's great. Most people lose their minds if they post on Critique Circle. They get torn apart and they just can't. But also in knowing how to critique other people and how to talk to other people about their stories and how to edit people and how to handle editing. Working with Adam has made me both a better editor in learning all the things that he's taught me about the craft of writing, but also in working with on some of his stuff has been, I know how to handle authors so much better now that I've worked out with, on so many different things and seen how that goes and how to get the right things out of those. So now that I'm editing all the stories in this anthology, it's been very helpful for me to do that, to be able to tell people this works this way. And like Adam asked me once, can you tell me more about that? That's a really interesting thing in this story. And I was like, yes, I could. And then a minute later I went, oh, you wanted to tell me that this part sucks because I didn't tell you what's going on enough.
I just got edited.
That's very clever. And so now I use that trick all the time. I go, hey, can you tell us more about this? I really like this idea. And then the authors go, oh, he likes my idea. I will tell him more. So much easier than, hey, there's not enough exposition here.
But here's the thing, and I tell it to my students all the time when they complain that an editor turned them down or the editor was too tough on them. I say, look, you send in a manuscript, they send it back. They're not saying to you that you're a bad person. They're not saying to you that you're ugly and your mom addresses you funny. They are saying this manuscript, for whatever reasons, does not work for me or does not work as it is for me. But you're not standing on a stage where you've just gotten on and the director says to you, you're too fat, pass, or, you're too old, pass, or you're the wrong size, pass. We get critiques in sort of a much more passive and non-aggressive way, even if it feels that way.
Than any other creative discipline.
Huh?
Than any other creative discipline. There was one of the Curtis Brown agents also played in a punk band. And he said, I don't know why authors complain about bad reviews. When I get bad reviews, it's in the form of a beer bottle thrown at my head. But also, I think that Heidi and I, if she had the same experience, which I don't doubt she has, I think we have a higher tolerance for critique because we've been experiencing it since the moment we could write on paper. Because, a lot of kids keep little journals, but I'm not sure that every kid gets their journal returned to them the next morning with mistakes corrected in red pen and a little prompt for the day's journal entry, which you had that too, Heidi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
We've literally
remember,
been getting critiques since we were 7.
but I remember saying to you,
So
I remember saying to you guys,
writers.
I remember saying to you guys, um, you know, what do you want me? This was maybe a little later.
Much
You know,
later.
what do you want me to do? I said, I can give you the editor, or I can give you the mommy response. And they all said the editor response. And I said, okay. And then I would give them first the mommy response, which was, this is wonderful. And then the editor's response was, but you can make it even better by this, this, and this.
And you spelled that wrong. And
I love how you two act like, oh, we had this hard thing, and then she was very hard on us, and she made us do this thing, and then, but most of the world listening to this podcast is like, you had someone editing your stuff like that when you were a child? What an amazing thing! This amazing opportunity! What an incredible head start you had! No more whining from either of you successful authors about how your very successful author mother made you successful authors.
I actually don't have a formal critique group. I have a lot of friends that I go to, and I know who I need for specific projects. I'm actually writing about a kid who plays soccer right now, and I go directly to my friend Jamie, and I text her, I'm going to need you to read this for all the soccer things, you know. And I have friends that are really specific that I'd use, but for people always ask me, well, you don't have a critique group? I said, my entire life is a critique group. I've never written something that hasn't been critiqued. I'm good on critique.
Well, I have written.
I have to
both
push
Heidi
my
and
mother
Adam.
away from my shoulder as I'm typing to stop the critique for just a second.
And again, I'd like to state, I have no, this is in no way, shape, or form a complaint. I mean, look, I can send stuff to my brother and he will read it critically or lovingly, however. And I even when he sends me stuff, I'm like, do you need a critique or you want me to love it? And he'll just write, need you to love it. And then so that's we're one of the things with us is we're so super upfront and honest about what we need. Like I said, when I'm going to send this manuscript, it's actually a novel, it's a chapter book that's been purchased. But I know that I'm going to get the soccer stuff wrong. So I'm going to send it very specifically to Jamie, who coaches her kids in soccer. So she's going to get all of that stuff. And she's already lined up all of her other soccer coach friends who are going to make sure that all those points are right. So I am.
Wait a minute. What is this soccer novel? And why haven't I heard of it?
It's the Owl novel, but the kid is a soccer player. You don't know everything. I always tell her that. You don't know all the things. She knows
everything I do with my life. You know, I'm a tango dancer.
She lives next door. She lives next door and we write together.
I know everything. I'm not reciprocal. But so when a professional writer is writing, they're very clear about what they need too. So it's about asking for that very specific critique as well, which I think is helpful. If I'm having a plotting problem, I'm going to Adam. Like, right, I would definitely send him something for that.
Well, plot man.
Yep, he's our plot guy. If I'm trying to make sure that it rhymes well, I might send it to my mom because she's going to knock every slant rhyme out. She's going to say this doesn't scan correctly. And I know she will be really on top of that. And like I said, for soccer, I go to Jamie. Even my friend Casey reads just about everything I write because I trust her implicitly to say, I love this, I love this, I love this. Now here are all the things that you need to work on. And that's what I need for that point. So being upfront about what you need out of a critique is just as important as taking the critique well.
It's really interesting to hear.
I told my wife once when she said, I thought you wanted my honest opinion of your writing. And I said, I 100% want your honest opinion of my writing. I also 100% want your honest opinion to be that it's the greatest thing you have ever read. How is this so hard to understand?
I love that Chris thought he was going to get an award edgewise in a room full of
It's a tough room.
I was hoping mostly that you guys would talk throughout this thing. I'm just looking to put in prompts in the right places. I'm going to be on this episode. I'm going to be on this thing every week. I can start 4 more of them and not even invite you if I want. But to have you guys on, I mostly want you talking. I also find it really interesting that since we're doing a podcast about self-publishing, to hear the difference with the way that Jane and Heidi treat their publishing careers, and it really is as part of a much bigger operation, both in the way that you have all your friends, all the people that you send things to, and then you have your editor and your illustrator and your publisher, and it's you're going to sell 20 times as many books, and there's going to be a bunch of people who contribute to this much larger number of sales. Whereas when we were at the writers convention at 20 books to 50K or 50 books to 20, whatever that thing is in Vegas, almost everybody we met was like, well, I do the writing, and then I do the editing, and then I do the advertising and marketing and my own cover design, and I do all these things, and I learned how to do all these things for myself. And now I've become that person where I do my own covers, I do my own editing, I got an editing certificate, I bought all the grammar books, I did all the stuff, I used the software, I learned how to make my own covers in Canva. I did all the things so that now I can do all that stuff. And I don't have anybody that like reads my stuff before I send it out.
That gives me the
poker
chills.
books. I had like 3 or 4 people who did see them, and Adam is probably the closest thing I had to an editor with my poker book. He formatted it for me and went through and looked at a bunch of pieces of it. But I don't have that kind of thing, and putting together that big an operation would then crush your self-publishing career, because now you're spending way too much money on a book that isn't going to sell 100,000 copies. It's an interesting juxtaposition between the 2 ways that people publish now.
We very much, when you think about traditional publishing, it is very much a collaboration. There is collaboration on every possible level. I was just sent art sketches for a new, I love them so much. I was just sent art sketches for a new reader that I have, called it's called Eagle in the End Zone. It's birds playing football, tag football, touch football, flag football. It couldn't be real football because of head injury problems with children. So
you know so little about this book you've written.
I'm so excited.
You got to remember, this is traditional publishing. So if she's getting the proofs now, she wrote it a year and a half ago.
Right.
It's not like you're just putting out the book a month after you wrote it.
It's also the 4th in the series, and I'm working on the 5th. So I'm thinking about that one and the other ones. So the 3rd one's not out yet, and I'm just getting the proofs for the 4th one now. So it's a little bit, it could have been either one of them, but
she does get money ahead of time.
I do. Yep. But yep. So even in the art, the editor, not the artist, the editor is sending me the sketches and asking for my input, which then the editor will bring to the art director, will bring to the artist. So there's a collaboration in, again, in that area where I'm collaborating back in that direction as well. And I'll either change my words according to the art, or the art will have to be changed if we all decide it doesn't fit exactly perfectly with the thing. So it is absolutely, I'm stuttering all over the place. It's past my bedtime. It is a collaboration on all levels. So that's, I think, and that is, I can't imagine thinking I'm doing the cover and the art and the editing and the promotion.
My mother actually started twitching listening to you list all the things you do. Just have to take care of for the book.
That's ridiculous, because most days I wake up and see that Jane has posted on Facebook about the things she's done so far, and I've just woken up and she's already posted about doing more than I'm going to do all day,
all week,
very frequently.
But it's all like
You're a family of liars.
Telling lies and getting paid. I honestly have nothing disparaging to say about either traditional or independent publishing. Like anything else, they come with their own strengths and weaknesses. I remember I was talking to someone who had just just quit their job to do freelancing something else. And I told them, I said, don't worry, don't be down on yourself if a couple of years later you have to go back to, you know, working for the man. I said, because there's a different set of problems in freelancing. And there's a different sense of freedom, but it's not necessary. It's not better for everybody, you know, and you've never freelanced before. And so I think it'll be exciting, but if it doesn't work, don't worry. It's not for everybody. It's not a failure. You know, and I've done both. And I tend towards freelancing stuff. And it's the same thing with, you know, with traditional and self-publishing. You do whatever works for you.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about what you do and which one of the things is going to work for you, or whether there are partial models where you can, you know, you can sort of be a lot more like a traditional published author by simply writing your stuff, then paying someone to edit it, paying someone to do a nice cover. If you invest some money in this thing, you can get it very close to what a traditional published experience would be like. But then your stop would be in the marketing. Paying someone to market your book doesn't work. You can't make a profit paying, you know, you could pay Adam and I to market your self-published book, and we could make you a lot bigger profit. We could help you get a lot more sales. What we couldn't do is make you enough money to pay us what we would want to do that.
Right.
It's just too much. If you want to pay me $100,000 a year, I can make you 50. I'm sure of it. But you probably better.
If I had my druthers, the writer that I would emulate, not for the way she wrote. She was a romance writer named Barbara Cartland, and she wrote something like 700 books. And she would lie down on her bed, and she would then talk to the person who was taking shorthand, and who then went and typed it all up. And by the end of the day, she had finished a novel. And
eaten a lot of grapes.
Right? And the shorthand lady then sent it to the publisher, who just brought it out. Now, that would be my goal if I could, but I don't write that way. Lying in bed and trying to write a book or a romance novel, which I couldn't write, though I can write romantic short stories. We each do what we can, what we're comfortable with. And sometimes you step out of your comfort zone and you try something new. As Adam knows, there's several books of poetry that I've self-published, or that I've published with the help of someone who, you know, put most of it together. But for me, what I love is the creating of the novel or the creating of the picture book. And that to me is, once I've done that, I'm done with that project and I'm on to the next. And if I had to take the time to create all of the rest of the stuff, takes away another 2 books or 3 books that I could have been writing. For Adam, it's different. For you, Chris, it's different. For Heidi, she writes on her own schedule. And I think we need to understand what serves us individually best, what makes us most comfortable and happy with the writing, what makes us more successful at the writing, and also gets the stuff out there. And for me, it's one thing. For Heidi, it's slightly different. For Adam, it's quite different. For you, it's completely different. And that's great. And I think that we're all very lucky to be living in a time when we can each choose to do all of these or some of these. Or if we get really ticked off, none of these.
In your family, it's normal to write and then be published and then make a living doing this thing. And for most people, it isn't. If someone had told me when I was
have a day job. I have a day job. Just to put it out. I have a paycheck that is separate from writing, and even as many books as I've written, I couldn't really fully live on my writing budget.
Sure.
What I make.
Most people don't see writing novels as a thing you can just decide to do, or writing children's books as a thing you can just decide to do and make money doing it. Most people have heard all the stories about 1,000 rejections and never, and they feel like this isn't a thing. This is like a lottery ticket you can buy, or you can check to see how talented you are. Most people see it that way, and I saw it that way for a long time, so I can speak from that perspective. That when I learned about self-publishing, I realized, oh, I don't have to rely on anyone else. And if I study hard and learn about this thing, I can win. I can make money doing the thing I want to do. I would rather do what Jane does and just create the story and then send it away and start creating another story. That sounds like a fantastic life. But for most people, it's not realistic to do that unless you spend many, many years getting to that point, and you're not sure if you're ever going to get there. So I can't pay my bills that way. That's not an option for me. What is an option for me is that if I study self-publishing for a couple of years really hard and I work at it, I'm going to win. There's a clear path to making this thing happen. Whereas the path to being Jane Yolen is like, I don't know where that even is, right? Most people have no idea how to get to that point.
I was a working editor, a children's book editor. And I learned all that I needed to learn from 5 years working at Knopf as an associate editor. And one of the things I learned in doing that was looking at other people's manuscripts. I realized I was a good writer, and very often better than anyone who is sending in stuff. Not everybody, but that, and for me, that was my learning experience. But the story was with my husband, and he was working first at IBM, and then he was at the University of Massachusetts as a professor, that for the first 15 years we were married, maybe even a little longer, he was making much more of a living than I. And then I wrote Al Moon, and then I wrote the dinosaur books, and I was making more money than he was by a good deal.
I want everybody to know also that Al Moon is very close to her 100th book. So when she says it was this long until I was making more than my professor husband, that was 100 books into her career. I mean, traditional publishing it is not going to make you millions of dollars unless you hit that lottery, unless you find that if all the everything lines up, every possible thing lines up, and you have a book that sells millions of copies. And that's the truth. And unfortunately, part of living in a society like we do in the United States is that having a career in the arts is often just what you're doing because of your passion, not to make money. There is an overlap, and I'm not saying that nobody makes a living in the arts. That is absolutely also not true, but it is something that is a job that you work at every day. And I joke with Dennis, my significant other, I would say, my job is mostly people telling me how horrible I am. So, it takes a thick skin. It's a lot of doing a ton of work and only some of it being published. And it's not, I'm not trying to be discouraging in any way, shape, or form. I love my job. I've been doing it for 29 years now. But it is one of these things that is not as valued where we are as other things are. So we have to do it because we love it. And whether it's the traditional path or whether it's the independent path, you really do have to, like Chris, you were saying, you have to do all of your homework. You have to get, have talked about the certificate in editing. You've talked about learning different, getting the spelling book, learning the programs, doing whatever your part in this business is. You really have to learn it to the nth degree.
I want to independent publishers, independent authors, that
they need to treat this the same way as well. That you may not make a living doing this right away. It may take a long time. If it's a creative thing that you love to do, you can do it as a self-published author as well, and keep your day job, write what you want. All those things are optional. We mostly tell people you have to do market research, and I'm trying to teach people to make a living, but there's that option as well. You can keep your job and be a self-published author, and that's fine. Be creative because you love to be creative. That's just not how I usually approach things.
But I want to tell you a story, because it has to do with the fact that someone can write a wonderful book and make a little bit of money, and someone can write the same book and make a hell of a lot of money. So here's the story. 8 years before Harry Potter came out, I wrote a book called Wizard's Hall. And it had a boy named Henry, whose mother sends him off to Wizard's Hall, even though neither one of them think he has much talent. And he gets to Wizard's Hall, where the pictures move and change on the walls, where his best friend is a redheaded boy and a very smart girl. In my instance, the very smart girl was a black girl. He saves the other kids at Wizard's Hall, who are being attacked by a terrible wizard who had used to be on the faculty of Wizard's Hall and is now trying to kill them all.
This book sounds remarkably familiar, and I never read it.
Weird, right?
Yeah. So she made the woman who wrote Harry Potter made
all the money,
$1 gazillion. And I get letters from kids all the time saying, I read your book, Wizard's Hall, and I thought you had copied her. And then my teacher showed me that your book was published 8 years before hers. Are you going to sue her? No, it's part of the zeitgeist. We all, as writers, are reading a lot of the same things and thinking a lot of the same thoughts. And some of us write something earlier and some of us write something later.
And there's a little bit of magic. Something sparks and takes off. And that's the lottery. And that's, we honestly, as hilarious and horrible as that story is, which is great family fun to discuss the Wizard's Hall story. But we celebrate all writers' wins, and that crosses traditional and independent, is remembering that we are all writers and all artists in our own way, and that getting ahead and doing good work is worth celebrating.
And
self-published
writing children's books, getting good books for children is the goal.
Yeah.
And when you're writing adult books, getting people who love your work and turn it into movies.
Even as a self-published author, if you happen to land in the right spot and write the right book at just the right time and get it into the right hands, you can be 50 Shades of Grey. This book sold 600,000 copies or something.
If you want to.
She ever had before she ever had an agent, she sold 600,000 copies on her own. It was not a well-written book. No one will argue that. It wasn't probably edited at all. It started out as fan fiction for Twilight. There are many reasons why this book shouldn't be successful, but it landed at just the right time, in just the right culture, and ended up making her millions of dollars before she ever even talked to an agent. And then many millions later, there are people who wrote that book before and after and never had any success. When you're a self-published author, you can make yourself a certain amount of success, but you still actually have that lottery ticket. You still can have this tremendous success if you land in the right spot at the right time.
And then there's Brandon Sanderson, who was already writing, and then wrote to finish up the Wheel of Time, and then was successful with his own series, and then he decided to kickstart his own self-published for his next book, and did it for $42 million.
It became one of the biggest Kickstarters in history. Out of the blue, just blew up. It was crazy.
So I mean,
He was only trying. He was
42
only
million.
trying for $1 million.
right. So you can go. It can go. The lottery ticket can go either way.
Which makes it the largest advance in history.
Yeah.
If you treat it as a book advance, which it is, it's by a lot, to like the largest advance in history before that. I remember Baldacci talking about getting like 2.5 million or something, and there have been a few bigger than that for like celebrity books, but nobody's close to 40 million.
And he just wrote an introduction to one of my books.
Oh, nice.
Ask him for $41 million. Say, Brandon, help me kickstart my next one, would you?
Tell him we need a podcast guest next week.
That's right.
Next week, it's Brandon and Heidi.
Why am I getting dragged back here?
Oh, you're just on the podcast now.
Chris, you're the prettiest one on the podcast.
Yeah, Chris likes looking at you more than me. That's why.
Everyone does.
That is accurate.
It's hard for me to know if Heidi's actually that attractive because I always see her next to Adam and she looks amazing.
Drag your brother.
Absolutely. Thank you both for being so much on the podcast. Thank you so much. This is amazing. Heidi, is there a formula for a children's book? Like, give us the quick, this is what is in a kid's book, right? If I want to write a children's book, tell me how to do it.
You need a good story or a good arc, a good concept. It needs to be child friendly. Don't write for the adults who are reading it. It needs to be for the children. That means lots of things. And I could give you a whole class on that, but that's pretty specific. Picture books are 32 pages. It's a pretty fast paced book. You need a beginning, you need a middle, you need an end, and you need an opening and a closing that are pretty near perfection. So I would say that.
How many words?
Less than 900 words.
Less than
Less
900?
Words.
I try and keep them less than 800 words. That's my sort of my goal at all times. Much less than that, if possible.
One of my latest one had 22 words in it.
And you made up 21 of those words.
Exactly. But I think the absolute key is child friendly. That it has to be focused on the child centered. Honestly, in the writing, I can say almost about 80% of the critiques that I do for people who either are already professional writers or have never written anything is about lopping off the beginning and starting about 3 pages into what they think the beginning is. And just keeping it to that there's really a template to that 32 pages on how to get it to arc correctly.
So my upcoming children's book, which is about an eagle who plays football.
So that series is actually readers, so that they're not necessarily picture books. They are for learning to read. And the first one's called Toucan with Two Cans. The second one is Flamingo Bingo. The third one is Chicken Karaoke. And the fourth one presently is Eagle in the End Zone. The fourth one is I Hope. I have not finished writing yet. No, the fifth one, I haven't finished writing it yet, is Dodo Dodgeball. So it's all birds doing things and getting them incredibly wrong, and then having fun.
So my octopus that plays water polo doesn't fit.
No, he'd probably be really awesome at it.
Yeah.
Yes, but he's not a bird.
All right, Jane, tell us about continuing to love writing for a long time. How do we keep doing this, and how do I keep enjoying it for 50 years?
I think you have to start with loving it, not sort of come in grudgingly. I think you want to be a storyteller. That's for me the important thing. I'm also a poet, and I write a poem a day that I send out to about 1,000 subscribers. But it's the writing. I feel bad when I haven't written something It doesn't have to be a full chapter. It doesn't have to be a full picture book. It might want to be a full poem a day, but I need to write something every day. And that just greases the wheels. I feel incomplete if I have not written something. And people say, well, how do you do that? Where do you get the ideas from? And I say, if you walk outside and come back in a half hour later and you don't have 10 ideas with you, you're not trying. Doesn't mean they're all valuable ideas or viable ideas, but you need to start somewhere, and that somewhere is an idea. And the idea can be one word. I had a one word, elephantasy. And that's the first word of my 22-word book.
I thought you were going to make a 50 Shades reference there.
and one time a granddaughter who was house sitting for me wrote and said, Nana, a bear came on your porch today and wouldn't go away. I said, you've just handed me a picture book.
Yeah. I read a few years ago when I was sort of studying lots of plotting and writing, and someone said, I think it was like a masterclass from someone, but they said, just pick a situation, put two things in a situation, and then figure out how they got there, and ideas will start coming. And they said, okay, there's an airline pilot, and he has a goldfish in the cockpit with him. How did this happen? And I was like, oh, okay. And then I wrote down a bunch of things. And it was like, okay, there's a dog wandering around a parking structure. So now, okay, how did the dog get there? And then there's 8 ideas. And someone else said, it was a thriller writer who said, take 2 newspaper articles and figure out the conspiracy that relates the 2 of them. They publish newspapers every day. There's ideas forever. There you go. And sure enough, when Adam and I started writing this kind of X-Files meets the Dirty Dozen kind of thing that we were working on, that's exactly what I did. I just looked at news items that had caught my attention over the years and figured out how they were related to each other, and it ended up being terribly creepy.
Tim Powers just looks at history and seems to look at unanswered questions in history, and his answers make perfect sense, and yet all involve magic and eldritch creatures, but it answers all the questions that were posed by this historical mysteries. It's fascinating.
He makes you wonder.
Yeah.
I sometimes think that if you have an idea and you can't let it go, if you go to sleep thinking about that idea and you wake up thinking about that idea, it's your brain telling you need to write that story.
That has become the driver for me for writing drafts. I no longer write drafts to write books. I write drafts because if I do, my brain will stop bothering me about that story. And then if at the end of the draft, I want to make it a book, great. But I've written a bunch of drafts that I'll just probably never use just to get that story out of my head. Just stop bothering me.
I write, sometimes I'll write a poem and turn it a year or 2 or 20 years later into a picture book. Sometimes I will turn it into a novel. Sometimes I have a great idea for a novel I don't yet have the chops for. But I make sure that I have it somewhere on my computer, because I go back and look at old ideas which never quite hatched, and suddenly I'm in a different place. It's a year later or 2 years later or 6 years later or 10 years later, and I know how to do it, or I know somebody that I can do it with who will know how to do it. So I think that there are as many ways to get ideas and to get started as there are people who want to write.
You can also change genres as well. You can have an idea, and I know that at least the 3 of us, Chris, I assume you've probably done this as well, I have one picture book manuscript that was turned down several places, and we turned it into a chapter book, and that didn't go anyplace. So now I'm working with an illustrator on this. Now we're making it into a graphic novel, and we'll see if it works that way, and because we love the idea and we're not ready to let go of it. So this is the difference, right, in traditional publishing versus independent publishing. I like it best as a graphic novel. Like, it works for me really well that way, but I would have never gotten there if I had independently published it as a picture book. So is that a pro or a con? It's sort of both, right? Because
yes, it is.
That's what I'm saying. It's
Yeah.
both. It's absolutely both, because I definitely could have independently published it as the picture book, and I think that would have been fun because I loved it as a picture book. But also now I've gotten to recreate this story in these different iterations, and I've learned more about the character, and I've created this whole world for her, and that's been fun. So, it may or may not go someplace, but morphing it in these different ways has been fun. So it's a little bit the same where you were saying, come back to it later. These are things that you can do with stories, shifting them into different genres as well.
Yeah, that is an interesting question as to whether the freedom sometimes can mean you have the freedom to just do the wrong thing right away. Whatever idea comes to me, I could publish it tomorrow, whether I should or not.
Well, the thing is you don't always need an editor or publisher to reject it. If it doesn't work, the readers will reject it for you. It's not as immediate, but after a year and you've still sold 2 copies, you might go, that one's not working.
And it has 2 bad reviews.
Yeah.
I think
worse than bad reviews? No reviews.
Yeah.
We're all, no matter how you write and publish your book, we are all at that point in the hands of an audience. Mm-hmm. The audience makes that decision, whether it's going to be the $1 million seller or the 2.5 books sold. And that's just part of the game. And if you're not comfortable with it, then just handwrite the book, make your own little pictures, and turn it into a movie and set it on your shelf. Give yourself an award. I don't know. But really,
that's the hedge that traditional publishing gives you, is that they give you money up front.
Yeah.
So you as the author have a hedge against it not selling, whereas the publisher's hedge is they might never take another book from you if it doesn't sell. But
Yeah.
Chris, you had asked about picture books specifically when you asked me a question, and the interesting thing to think about, and I think that this is built into traditional publishing, but it's something to think about if you plan to go the independent publishing route, is that you are marketing to not your actual audience, because your readership is children and your purchasers is a different group of people. So the children are not purchasing the book. So it's an interesting genre in that you are selling it to educators or parents or grandparents. You're selling to adults, but the book has to be loved by the children, by the readers. So it's a very different marketing experience. And that's something to think about if you want to take that on yourself.
That's always been my mother's true gift, is writing books that delight both the reader and the one who's getting read to. There's a couple of her picture books that children love, and as an adult, you're just practically weeping while you're reading them. It's so emotional, and you're like, well, this is not cool in 200 words. It's unfair.
I learned about that in a Facebook post after I became friends with Jane, and somebody wrote a post about a fart in an elevator, and I wrote something writery and clever and felt pretty good about my response. And then Jane wrote something that almost made me cry. And I was like, that's just, it was a fart in an elevator. I can't believe she did that. That was amazing. It was literally, I'm not joking about, it was approximately like this. It was actually a post about a fart in an elevator. And Jane turned it into this heartbreaking story in like 4 sentences. It was ridiculous.
I have no memory of this.
It's probably best.
You see how that works, right? That's even worse.
I can assure you that memory is not important, because I've gone through much of my life not able to remember anything, and I'm doing fine.
It's fine. Who are you guys?
Well, all I can say is this is well past my bedtime.
Yep. I think we'll wrap it up. That was great, guys.
Wonderful to have you. So next week, all four of us then. I'll send you all an invite. So this podcast is going to really take off now.
Same time,
yes.
same next week.
Go ask my friend Brendan.
Yeah, and tell Mr. Sanderson we'd like to have him come along as well.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Written Well podcast, your source for anything and everything in the world of self-publishing.